20 Environments Under the Seas. Jules Verne, Chapter 1. A pitfall, fleeing the year 1866, was marked by a bizarre event, an unexplained and inexplicable phenomenon that no one has doubtless forgotten without mentioning the rumors that were stirring up the populations of the ports and overexcite the public spirit inside the continents. The seafarers were particularly moved, the ship owners, master skipper and master of Europe, and the mayor office of the military navies of all countries, and after them the governments of the various states of the two continents were concerned about this fact. To the highest point indeed, for some time had met on sea with a huge thing, a long, fusiform object, sometimes phosphorescent, infinitely larger and faster than a whale. The facts relating to this appearance recorded in the various logbooks agreed quite precisely on the structure of the object or being in question, the incredible speed of these movements, the surprising power of his locomotion, the particular life which he seemed gifted if it was a cetacean. He surpassed in volume all those that science with yaw to gold, neither Cuvier nor Lacépède nor Monsieur Dumeril nor Monsieur de Quatrefages just admitted the existence of such a monster unless he had seen what is called seen with their own eyes, to learn the average of the observations made on various occasions by rejecting the timid evaluations which assigned to this object a length of 200 feet, but by rejecting the exaggerated opinions which said it was wide a mile and long 3. It could be said, however, that it was phenomenal, far exceeded all the dimensions accepted until now by ichthyologists. If there existed, however, the fact in itself was no longer undeniable, and with this inclination which pushes the human brain to the marvelous, one will understand the emotion produced all over the world by this supernatural appearance. As to the rejection in the rank of fables, it was necessary to give up, in fact, on the 20th of July, 1866. The steamer Governor Eganson of Calcutta and Maxim Navigation Company had met this movant mass 5 miles in the east coast of Australia. Captain Baker believed himself first in the presence of an unknown pitfall. He was even disposed to determine the exact situation when 2 columns of water projected by the inexplicable object as the auction, so whistling at 150 feet in the hedge, so unless it was that, one was subjected to the intermittent expansions of a geyser. Governor Higginson was indeed dealing with a few previously unknown aquatic mammals, which discharged through its vents columns of water mixed with air and steam. By effect was also observed on the 23rd of July of the same year in the Pacific Seas by the Cristobal column of West Indian Pacific Steam Navigation Company. So this extraordinary cetacean could be transported from one place to another with a surprising velocity. Since 3 days apart, the Governor Eganson and the Cristobal column had observed it at 2 points of the map, separated by a distance of more than 700 marine sites. 15 days later, half the place from there, the National Company's Helvetia and the Royal Mail's Shannon, marching against the foothills in this part of the Atlantic between the United States and Europe, reported the monster by 42 degrees 15 minutes north attitude and 60 degrees 35 minutes longitude west of the Greenwich meridian. In this simultaneous observation, believed they could estimate the minimum length of the mammal at more than 350 feet English, since the Shannon and Helvetia were smaller than it was measure 100 meters from the Traves to the largest drums or whales, the one that frequents the pages of the islands in Louisianes, the Kulima, which is long Ulick, have never exceeded the length of 56 meters, if even it reaches it. These reports arrived on the spot new observations made aboard the transatlantic, the Première, a collision between the Etna of the Inman line and the monster, a report drawn up by the officers of the French frigate Normandy, a very serious upturn obtained by the staff of Commodore Fitzjames aboard the Lord of the Deep Crimeur. Public opinion in the countries of the world dies light. We joked about the phenomenon, but the serious and practical countries, England, America, Germany, without worrying strongly. Everywhere, in the big centers, the monster became fashionable. We sang it in the cafes. We flouted it in the newspapers. We joy on the theaters. The ducks scream. A beautiful opportunity to lay eggs of all colors we saw reappear in the newspapers, short of copies, all the imaginary and gigantic beings from the white whale, the terrible Moby Dick of the hyperboreal regions to the outsized kraken whose tentacles can enclose a building of 500 tons and drive it into the abyss of the ocean. The minutes of ancient times were reproduced, the opinions of Aristotle and Pliny, who admitted the existence of these monsters. Then the Norwegian accounts of the bishop Prontoppidan, the relations of Paul and monsters. Then the Norwegian accounts of the bishop Prontoppidan, the relations of Paul and Ged, and finally, the reports of Mr. Harrington, whose good faith cannot be suspected, when he claims to have seen being on board the Castillon in 1857. It was the Norm snake that had never frequented until the mayors of the former constitutionals then burst it. Controversy of the gullible and the incredulous in scholarly societies and scientific journals, the question of the monster in not the minds, the journalists who make profession of science and struggle with those who make profession of mind, shed floods of ink during this memorable campaign, some even 2 or 3 drops of blood, because from the sea snake they have 20 to the most offensive personalities. 6 months during the war continued, with various chances, to the Articles of Fund of the Geographical Institute of Brazil, of the Royal Academy of Sciences of Berlin, of the British Association of the Smithsonian Institution of Washington, or discussion of the Indian archipelago cosmos of the bevel of the long moths of Petermann, or scientific chronicles of the great newspapers of France. And abroad, the small press retaliate with an inthorable verve. It is spiritual writers by audience, a word of the innate quoted by the opponents of the monster under pie. Indeed, that nature did not make leap, and they adjure. Their contemporary of our points give a denial to nature by admitting the existence of the cracks of the sea, snakes of Moby Dick, and other elucubrations of sailors. And a Lee. Finally, in an article of a satirical newspaper, most dreaded, beloved of these editors, broaching the whole pushed to the world as Hippolyte delivered him a last blow, and the Cheva in the middle of a universal outburst of laughter, the mind had defeated science during the first months of 1867. The question appeared to be buried, and it did not seem to see rebirth. When new facts were brought to the public's attention, it is more than a scientific problem to solve, but rather a serious, real danger to avoid. The question took a completely different face. The monster became Island Rock Pitfall, but leaky, indeterminable pitfall. Elusive on the 5th of March, 1867, the Montreal Moravian Ocean Company, standing overnight at 27 degrees 30 minutes, latitude and 72 degrees 15 minutes, longitude, struck a rock from his starboard hip that no map marked in his dams. Under the combined effect of the wind and its 400 horsepower, he was walking at a speed of 13 knots. There is no doubt that without the superior quality of his hull, the Moravian, open to the shock, had swallowed up with the 237 passengers he was bringing back from Canada. The accident had occurred at about 5 a.m. When the day began at peak, officers of Carr rushed to the rear of the building. They examined the ocean with the most scrupulous attention. He saw nothing but a strong stirring which broke to 3 corners, as if they did not apply brutally. Beaten up, the raising of the place was exactly caught, and the Moravian continued to its road without apparent damage. Had it hit an underwater rock, or some Norm's wreck of a shipwreck, one cannot know, but examination made of its hull in the basins of Redoux, it was recognized that part of the keel had been broken. This extremely serious fact in itself, perhaps forgotten like so many others. If 3 weeks later it was not reproduced in identical conditions, only thanks to the nationality of the ship of this new collision, thanks to the reputation of the company to which this ship belonged, the Vingt, Utah. Immense reverence. Nobody ignores the name of the famous English shipowner. Nobody ignores the name of the famous English shipowner Cunard. It's intelligent, industrial, founded in 1840, a postal service between Liverpool and Halifax, with 3 wooden and wheeled ships of a force of 400 horsepower, and a tonnage of 1,162 tons. 8 years after the equipment of the company grew of 650 horsepower and of 1,820 tons, and 2 years later of 2 other high ships in power, and Anton age in 1853, the company that a Hard, whose privilege for the transport of dispatches had just been renewed, added successively to its equipment. The Arabia, the Persia, the China, the Scotia, the Java, the Russia, all first market and the largest ships, which after the gritty, Stern never used to travel the seas. So in 867, the company owned 12 ships, including 8 Arison 4 propeller. If I give these very succinct details, it is so that everyone knows, well, how important is this shipping company known all over the world for its intelligent management. No ocean shipping company has been run more skillfully. No business has been more successful. For 26 years, the Cunard ships have crossed the Atlantic 2,000 times, and never a trip has been missed. Never a delay has ever occurred, neither a letter, nor a man, nor a ship has been lost. So the passengers still choose, despite the powerful competition France makes to it, the Cunard line, in preference to any other, as it has lost a survey done on official documents of the last years. This said, no one will be surprised by the impact of the accident that happened to one of his most beautiful steamers on the 13th of April, 1867. The Mother is in beautiful, the breeze that was maneuverable, the Scotia was at 15 degrees 12 minutes, longitude and 45 degrees 37 minutes latitude. It was walking with a speed of 13 knots 43 hundredths. Under the thrust of its 1,000 horsepower, these wheels were beating the sea with perfect regularity. Its water tyrant was then 6 meters 70 centimeters, and are moving 6,624 cubic meters at 4:17 in the evening. During the lunch of the passengers gathered in the big living room, a shock can be felt in short on the hull of the Scotia by its hip, and a little behind the port wheel. The Scotia had not struck, it had been hit, and rather by a sharp or puncturing instrument that blunt the collision to appear so light that no one was worried on board without the cry of the caliers, who went back on the deck crying, "We sink first." Sink the passengers were very frightened, but the Captain Anderson reassured that the danger could not be imminent. Scotiabank, divided into 7 compartments by watertight partitions, had to brave a penalty, 1 voice of water. Captain Anderson will be said immediately in the hold he recognized that the 5th compartment had been invaded by the sea, and the speed of the invasion proved that the voice of water was very considerable. Fortunately, this compartment did not contain the boilers because the fires were suddenly extinguished. Captain Anderson's son stopped immediately, and one of the sailors dived to recognize the variable. A few moments later, noticed the existence of a hole wide of 2 meters in the hull of the ship steamer. A waterway could not be blinded, and the Scotia, these wheels, half walnut of the continue thus his journey. He was then 300 miles from Cap Clear, and after 3 days of a delay which worried strongly Liverpool, he entered the company's basins. The engineers then proceeded to visit the Scotia, which was put in dry dock. A pure, believing their eyes, 2.5 meters below the flotation opened a regular tear in the shape of an isosceles triangle. The fracture of the sheet was of a perfect sharpness, and it was not more surely struck. The punch had to be made that the perforating tool that he had produced was of an unusual type, and after having been thrown with a prodigious force, having thus pierced a sheet of 4 centimeters, he had to withdraw himself by a retrograde and really inexplicable movement. This latter fact was the result of enthusiasts, again, the public opinion since that time. In fact, the maritime disasters that had no determined cause firm it on the account of the monster. This fantastic animal endorses the responsibility of all these shipwrecks, whose number is unfortunately considerable, because on 3,000 ships whose loss is recorded annually at the Bureau Veritas, the figure of the steamships or sailing ships supposed and lost body, and well as by the absence of news, does not rise to less than 200. But it was the monster who, rightly or unjustly, was accused of their disappearance, and thanks to him the communications between the various continents becoming more and more dangerous, the public declared itself and categorically asked that the mothers were finally rid, and at all costs of this formidable it is enough.